Fazbear Frights number 3, 1:35 a.m. Story 2, Room for One More. To tell the truth, Stanley didn't like the place. Something about the way it was hidden from passerby made him wonder what secrets were kept there. Was it even a legitimate business? Or were sketchy deals made under the table? Stanley didn't know. When he was hired, the supervisor had told him that his job was on a need-to-know basis. And, as far as the business was concerned, Stanley didn't need to know anything. After a year and a half on the job, the only thing Stanley knew for sure was that his paychecks always cleared at the bank. To get to work, he had to walk through a storage yard stacked high with lumber, concrete blocks, and steel girders. Concealed in the middle of all the building materials was a stairway leading underground. A single low-wattage light bulb illuminated the dark steps just enough for him to find his way down safely. At the bottom of the stairs, he had to pass the same stinking biowaste bin he passed every night. It always had the same mixture of foul odors, something chemical, something like rotting food, and most disturbingly, something like how he'd imagined the smell of decaying flesh. The stench set the tone for the night Stanley was about to spend. Just like the biowaste bin, Stanley's job stank. He scanned his ID badge, and the huge metal door opened with a groan that always seemed to express how Stanley felt about his upcoming shift. Sometimes he groaned right along with it. The facility was dark and lacked proper ventilation. Because of its underground location, there was always a level of dampness in the air that made Stanley feel clammy. Supposedly, the building was a factory, but even on the inside, it provided no clue as to what kind of work might have been going on there. The building was a network of dim hallways, faintly illuminated by sickly greenish lights. Networks of black pipes snaked overhead. Throughout the hallways were giant locked metal doors. Stanley had no idea what went on behind them. If the place were a factory, it would stand to reason that people were on the premises, manufacturing something. Sometimes, Stanley could hear the banging and rumbling of some kind of machinery behind the big locked doors. He assumed that there must be other workers in the building, people operating the machinery. But during his entire time on the job, he had yet to lay eyes on another human being. It was strange to be a guard and not really know what it was you were guarding. Stanley walked down one of the hallways, hearing hissing and clanging from behind one of the metal doors, and then scanned his ID badge to enter the security office. He settled down at his desk, where he could watch all of the building's entrances and exits on the facility's high-tech monitors. Stanley had been hired to work at this facility a year and a half ago. At his job interview, it became obvious that this job was unlike any other security guard position he had ever held before. The supervisor who had hired him was a strange little bald man in a too large suit who fidgeted and seemed to have a hard time meeting Stanley's eyes. "It's not a difficult job," the man had said. "You sit in the security office, watch the building's exits on the monitors, and make sure nothing gets out." "Nothing gets out?" Stanley had asked. "In other jobs, I've always watched to make sure nothing gets in." "Well, this isn't like other jobs," the twitchy little man had said, taking a sudden interest in the papers on his desk. "Just watch the exits, and you'll be fine." "Yes, sir," Stanley had said. He was confused, but he didn't want to make trouble. He had been laid off of his previous position, and the bills were piling up. He needed this job. "When do you think you can start?" the man had asked him, looking in the general direction of Stanley's face, but not meeting his eyes. "As soon as you need me, sir." Stanley had been expecting a more rigorous interview. Usually for security jobs, there were lots of questions, personality tests, references to be followed up on, and an extensive background check. Companies wanted to make sure they weren't hiring the fox to guard the henhouse, as Stanley's granny used to say. "Excellent," the man had said, with what was almost a smile. We've had a sudden vacancy, I'm afraid, and we are in urgent need of someone to fill this position." "Guy up and quit on you?" Stanley had asked. "In a matter of speaking," the man had said, looking past Stanley. "Unfortunately, the prior security guard passed away suddenly. Very tragic." "What happened to him?" Stanley had asked. He knew there were inherent dangers in the job, but if the prior guard had been killed in the line of duty, he felt like he ought to be told about it. If this job was especially dangerous, he needed to know what he was signing up for and make an informed decision. "Massive heart attack, I'm afraid," the man said, looking down and shuffling some papers on his desk. "We never know how much time we're given, do we?" "No, sir," Stanley had said, thinking of his dad, whom he had lost recently. The man had nodded thoughtfully, then looked at Stanley. "But I think you'll find it an easy job. Just keep an eye on those exits. Make sure everything that's supposed to be in the building stays in the building, and you'll be fine." "Yes, sir," Stanley had said. "Thank you." He had reached out to shake the man's cold, bony little hand. And just like that, he had the job. As a result, Stanley had spent the last year and a half monitoring exits to make sure nothing got out, even though he wasn't entirely sure what that phrase even meant. Why had the man who hired him said nothing instead of nobody? What exactly was it that Stanley was watching for? He had thought he might ask the strange, twitchy little man about it one day, but since that brief job interview, Stanley had never seen him again. Stanley unscrewed the lid on his thermos of coffee and got ready for another long, lonely night. He wouldn't mind the lonely nights so much if his days weren't lonely too. Up until 2 weeks ago, when Amber, his girlfriend of more than 2 years, dumped him, his days had been brighter. During his dull working hours, Stanley would actually look forward to the time that awaited him once he clocked out at 7 a.m. He would walk over to the city diner across the street for a big breakfast: eggs, bacon, toast, and crusty, oniony hash browns. Once his belly was full, he'd walk back to his apartment and fall into an exhausted sleep for a few hours. Afterwards, he would wake up, eat a sandwich, do a little cleaning or laundry, and then play video games until Amber got off work at the grocery store at 5. Amber always brought over ingredients for dinner. She loved the cooking shows on TV and liked to try out new recipes, which was just fine with Stanley. He loved to eat and had the belly to prove it. He wasn't fat exactly, just well padded, like a comfortable sofa. Spare ribs with plum sauce, chicken adobo, spaghetti carbonara. Whatever new recipe Amber wanted to experiment with, Stanley was happy to eat it. Amber and Stanley would cook dinner together, and then they would sit across from each other at his little kitchen table and eat and talk about their days. Since Amber actually saw people at her job, she often had funny stories about things that happened at the store. After they loaded the dishwasher, they'd cuddle on the couch and watch TV shows or a movie until it was time for Stanley to get ready for work. Most of their dates were cozy nights in, but on Stanley's nights off, they'd go out to dinner, usually to Luigi's Spaghetti House or Wong's Palace, and see a movie or go bowling. Stanley's time with Amber always felt happy and comfortable, and he had thought she felt the same way. But on the terrible day when she broke up with him, she said, "This relationship is as stagnant as a frog pond. It's not going anywhere." Blindsided, Stanley had said, "Well, where would you like it to go?" She had looked at him like his question was part of the problem. "That's just it, Stanley. You shouldn't have to ask." Stanley was barely 25, and Amber was the first serious girlfriend he had ever had. He loved her, and had told her so, but he didn't feel emotionally or financially ready for engagement or marriage. He had thought that what he and Amber had was enough for now. It was too bad she didn't feel that way too. A few days before, Stanley had gone to his nephew Max's 5th birthday party at his sister Melissa's house. It was the first time he'd left the house to go anywhere but work since the breakup. At first, the sight of the playful preschoolers and the familiar festiveness of the balloons, cake, and presents had cheered him up a little. He had come in his uniform because he knew Max thought it was cool. And as it turned out, the other boys Max's age thought it was cool too. They had swarmed him, saying things like, "Your badge is so shiny," and "Do you chase bad guys?" They were a hoot. Stanley liked little kids. Always had. After the kids had gone back to their party games, Stanley had listened to the parents who were standing around, talking and laughing about the things their kids said or did. He had started thinking, what if Amber had been his chance to settle down and have kids and he'd blown it? What if he was doomed to always be the bachelor uncle at his nephew's birthday party, standing on the sidelines, and never somebody's husband, somebody's dad? It didn't help that Todd, Stanley's brother-in-law, had sidled up to him and said, "Hey man, I was picking up a takeout order at Luigi's the other night, and I saw your ex on a date with the manager of the snack space." Stanley had nearly choked on his birthday cake. "She's dating someone else already? It sure looked like a date to me." "She probably had him lined up before she even broke up with you," Todd had said. "Do you know the guy?" Stanley had shaken his head. "Well, I hate to break it to you, but he's tall and fit. A sharp dresser, too. I checked out his car in the parking lot when I left. A sports car." Stanley was short and dumpy and didn't own a car. And if he did, it sure wouldn't be anything as expensive as a sports car. Maybe that's why his relationship with Amber had been stagnant. She wanted to climb the social ladder, and he was content where he was. Stagnant Stanley, he should be called. He had to stop brooding, he told himself. He was at work, so he should be working. He drank his coffee and monitored the lack of activity in the building. All the exits were clear. They were always clear. He didn't wish for danger, but it would be nice to have something to do. Even with the caffeine, his eyelids started getting heavy, and his head felt like a bowling ball he was trying to carry on his shoulders. He started to nod off. This was typical. On any given shift, Stanley was likely to spend 4 of the 8 hours fast asleep. That was one reason he didn't try too hard to look for another job despite his boredom and loneliness. How many places would pay you for sleeping? Soon, Stanley was snoozing away in his chair, his head lolled back, and his big feet propped up on the desk. Stanley was awakened by an alarm. Disoriented for a second, he mistook it for his alarm clock at home. But then he remembered where he was, and checked the monitors. A motion sensor had been activated in a vent, right there in the security office. Well, at least he wouldn't have to go far to check things out. Stanley stretched, rose from his chair, and grabbed his flashlight. He squatted on the floor, removed the cover from the vent, and shone the flashlight into the darkness. He saw nothing. Really, the vent was too small for anything too dangerous to pass through it. Maybe a mouse or a rat had activated the sensor. If the problem continued, he might fill out a report, though he was never really sure who received and read the reports he sent, and suggested that the management call a pest control company. Stanley yawned and went back to his chair. It was time to get back to his nap. 2 hours later, he woke up with a start. He sat up, wiped the drool from his mouth, and looked at the monitors. Nothing. But on his desk, there was an object that hadn't been there before. It wasn't immediately apparent what it was. Upon closer inspection, it appeared to be a toy, a doll of some kind, with jointed arms and legs. It wore a tiny white tutu, and its little feet were painted white, so it looked like it was wearing ballet slippers. Its arms were raised like a ballerina who was about to do a pirouette. Stanley smiled to himself at his rudimentary knowledge of ballet terminology. All those times of being dragged to his older sister's ballet recitals as a kid had at least taught him something. The simple jointed doll also reminded him a little of the jointed dolls that had been in his high school art room. The wooden dolls could be arranged in a variety of positions to teach students how to draw the human form. But unlike the art room's dolls, which were faceless, this ballerina doll had a face. But it wasn't the face you would expect. It would seem logical for a ballerina's doll's face to be painted to look like a beautiful girl's. Not this one. Its face was clown white. Its big black eye sockets were blank and empty. It had no discernible nose, but its big black mouth was a toothless, grinning, gaping hole. The face didn't match the body at all. Why would somebody paint a ballerina's doll's face in such a ghoulish style? Stanley's mind was full of questions. What was this weird thing? And what was it doing on his desk? Who had put it there? He picked up the doll. He spent a few moments bending it into different positions. Look! Now she's doing the splits. Now she's doing a Russian folk dance. Stanley chuckled at how easily amused he was. He really did spend way too much time by himself these days. He should get a hobby. He tilted the doll over to make her do a handstand. A small voice from inside the doll's body said, "We like you." What was that? Stanley said, tilting the doll over again. It must have some kind of sound chip inside that reacted to movement. "We like you." It was a little girl's voice, high-pitched and giggly. Cute. "Who's we?" Stanley said, smiling down at the doll. "I just count one of you." He tilted her. "I like being close to you," the doll chirped. "Well, believe me, it's been a while since a girl said that to me," Stanley said, holding up the doll to look at her better. "Too bad you're tiny and not an actual human being. Kind of weird looking, too." He tilted her again. He wondered how many recorded phrases were in her vocabulary. "You're so warm and squishy," the doll said with a giggle. Well, that was a new one. But it was true, or at least the squishy part was. He had been eating like an elephant ever since Amber broke up with him. He had always been a big eater, but this was different. Now he was eating because of sadness. Whole tubs of chocolate chip cookie dough ice cream, family-sized bags of potato chips with French onion dip, half a dozen fast food tacos in one sitting. Emotional eating, the experts on the internet called it. Emotional eating had made him a warm, squishy mess. He should start eating healthier. Salads and fruit and grilled chicken. And he needed to go back to the gym. He had a gym membership. He just couldn't remember the last time he'd used it. Maybe before he and Amber got together? "I think you're a good influence on me," he said to the doll, smiling as he tilted it. "Take me home with you," the doll said, with the same little giggle in her voice. He set her back on his desk. "I might do that, little dolly," he said. "It's almost like you were left here as a present for me." But who would have left it for him? He looked again at the doll's ballerina body and strange mask-like face. "A weird present, but I don't know. I kind of like you." Tilt. "We like you," the doll said. "So the feeling is mutual," Stanley said, chuckling again. He set the doll down and checked the monitors. Nothing at the exits. It was time to finish that nap. Stanley was at Luigi's spaghetti house, eating at a table by himself. He was cutting the spaghetti into little sticks with his butter knife, which used to drive Amber crazy. "You were supposed to twirl it onto your fork," she said, using your spoon to keep the noodles from falling off. To Stanley, this always seemed like an unnecessary delay of getting food into his mouth. He felt the same way about the chopsticks when they ate at Wong's palace, which Amber always insisted on using, while Stanley efficiently shoveled in his General Tso's chicken with a fork. But Stanley and Amber weren't eating anywhere together anymore. She was sitting at a cozy table in the corner with a handsome, well-dressed man. They were talking and laughing and feeding each other bites off of their plates. Stanley felt embarrassed to be sitting at his table alone, but Amber and her date didn't seem to see him. It was like he was invisible. Stanley looked around the dining room to avoid looking at Amber and her new boyfriend. At the head of the room, where there was usually a piano, was a casket. Stanley's dad lay inside it, his sunken cheeks too rosy with makeup, where the mortician had tried to disguise his death pallor. Everywhere he looked, Stanley saw someone he had loved and lost. He looked down at his plate to avoid seeing anyone else. His spaghetti had turned into a tangle of writhing, wriggling worms. The worms crawl in. The worms crawl out. They eat your guts, and they spit them out. Stanley remembered that gruesome song from the playground when he was a kid. It was morbid, sure, but what did they know of death back then? But now, his childhood was gone. His dad was gone. Amber was gone. Why did everything good have to go away? He picked up the plate of worms and hurled it across the room. The plate shattered against the wall and left a red smear of spaghetti sauce, studded with chopped up noodles. Stanley woke up, gasping for breath. It's okay, he told himself. It was just a bad dream. It was 5 minutes until his shift was over, and the doll that had been on his desk was gone. It was strange. Nobody but him was ever in here. Who would have come into the security office and taken it? Maybe the same person who had come in and left it in the first place. Whoever that was. For a split second, he considered filing a report about it, but realized there was no way he could. What would it say? Fell asleep at my post at 3:02 a.m., woke up to find a doll on my desk, fell back asleep, woke up, and it was gone? That was a quick way to get fired. If Amber were still around, he would have a story to tell about something interesting that happened at work for once. These were some of the saddest moments of Stanley's already sad days, when he'd think, wait till I tell Amber. And then he remembered that there was no Amber to tell. Stanley held his nose as he passed the bio-waste bin outside the facility. He emerged from the stairs to a day that was bright and sunny. After staying in a dark hole for 8 hours, it always took his eyes a few minutes to adjust to the intensity of daylight. He squinted and blinked, like a mole that had just popped up from its underground tunnel.